No,
Can't
no,
believe
that's good. I'm glad you mentioned that. I feel similar with like around trustlessness, right? So sometimes it's like you know what they mean, and
of
it's like
course.
nerds that are using words in a technical, abstracted sense, but the vibe is very different. People, the average person, the average, let's say, Web2 person hears trustlessness, and it already sounds like a non-starter. Like, do I what? Why do I even trust? I like trust. Trust is good. I want things that I trust. I want systems that I trust. I want to be able to complain to someone when something breaks. So yeah, it's just another example going when it comes to adoption, how let's get the systems right first, and then we can figure out the paint job and stuff. But the language definitely has a long way to go.
Yeah, it's very funny. Well, and I think we picked that language because it kind of tickles our brains, right? We're like, haha, it sounds like information
Right.
because it's surprising. And it might even be a little bit of a manifestation of our own information addiction, that we like things that sound surprising. So okay, so that's the partitioning with option, and maybe we can loop back around and talk about like concrete ways in which I'm designing mechanisms in both of those spaces, um, and how we might come up with ways. One of the ways that I really like to frame this is quite simply, I say, like, is it possible? How might we make it only profitable for companies to do what's good? Um, and then of course people are like, well, what counts as good? And the answer is like, well, somehow communities need to be able to define for themselves what counts as good, what's worth spending time on. So this is a framing that I'm fond of. I don't know if it lands in any way. Almost always people have arguments against me. I think, like, I often hear kind of like leftist arguments against the company part, right, and the profitable part. They're like, well, we don't, company profit, that's bad. And I also hear arguments against good, right, and that tends to come from the other side of things, which is but sometimes it comes from a postmodernist perspective, like what is, like, is there such thing as good? Can communities define what's good? And so and I have space for all of those things. I'm totally open to the possibility that, like, my framing is just not the right framing, and I need to put a better paint job on it, just like you said. But I think it is worth striving for, right? Because of course, if we could build corporations that can sustainably exist and that can create things that are beneficial for all of us, well, not only have we made things much better for ourselves, but then also it seems like we've made some progress on the problem of AI alignment. There's a analogy which I find compelling between AI as artificial superintelligences and corporations as just minor forms of, like, minor deities that are artificially super intelligent, and are also misaligned, and all of the havoc that they've already wreaked on the world. So that's the goal, and maybe it's audacious, maybe it's impossible, but there is no problem that's worth working on that's more important than that one. And so, okay, so that's project number one. That's option. That's what I've been working on for a really long time. And along the way, I tweeted something about collective intelligence. I said, why is there not more funding for work on collective intelligence? And only one person in the world liked my tweet. I don't know if that's actually true, but it was very few people. And one of them was Rolf Kaufman, who's working at Digital Gaia. And Rolf's approach is, whereas my approach is like game theoretic and category theoretic, meaning that, like, people will interact in natural language with this tool. Rolf's approach is model and data oriented. And so he is making this giant database of models of things. So, for example, we work with this company called Savimbo that is planting a whole bunch of trees in Putumayo, Colombia. And in Putumayo, Colombia, they've, like, planted just a handful of saplings, and they would like to kind of certify or verify in some way that, those saplings are going to grow up into adult trees that sequester CO2. And one day they'd like to be able to get carbon credits for it. But their problem is that they do not give a fuck about what the existing, stamping methodologies say about how you should do this, right? So they haven't planted the trees that grow the fastest. They haven't even planted that many trees. Instead, what they happen to know about the rainforest is that if you plant a handful of trees, that can be enough to like for the seeds of those trees to then allow more trees to grow. And they're focused almost entirely on planting native species and doing it in a way that's economically sustainable for the community that they serve. And these are things that the traditional methodologies, the people that want to check boxes are not capable of capturing. But if you write a model of what are the inputs into a tree growing and how fast does this tree grow on average, et cetera, and then you use this model once again in kind of that Bayesian brain sense. It uses this field of study called active inference as kind of like the underlying grounding work. Active inference is really interesting. I could talk about maybe way too much. I'll try and skip over it. Then you can make predictions about like how tall the trees should be and what observations you should be seeing. And then you can cross-validate those with satellite data and with sending people locally to like verify whether or not they saw what they expected to see, with photos from the ground. And now all of a sudden you've created this like dynamic way to check whether or not the trees were planted and what your expected amount of CO2 is that's going to be sequestered. And so you can kind of like think about the work that I think about, of course, because I'm working there. The thing that Digital Gaia is doing, the thing that Option is doing as duals of one another. Option is doing it with game theory. So like people are having to think and then they're putting things into the system. Whereas with Digital Gaia, you design this model and then the model checks against the data and it figures out which models to believe. And that this can be this kind of giant distributed network of models performing inference in order to find out what's going on the ground. And so when I met Roth, I had this one way that I thought that the problem could be solved. And I didn't believe that there's another way to do it, of course, like the hubris. And he goes, and I go, I didn't even think active inference was real. I thought that people just, like were worshiping Carl Friston. He's kind of like the founder of active inference. And he goes, no, it's just KL divergence. And I was like, I don't know what that is. And so over the years, like he's brought me up to speed on how the technology works. And I'm really excited about it as well as kind of this inference layer that can exist on top of a Web3 stack. So hopefully that gives like a high level of the projects and the problems and how they fit together and and what I'm excited about. I don't know if it was in any way understandable.